Hey everyone, and welcome to today's live broadcast of the Four Pillars of Post, Part 1, Editing. This is the first of a four-part course with Justin Joseph Hall, who's here with us today from Fourwind Films and Quatre-Vents. He's an award-winning multimedia storyteller and founder of both Fourwind Films and Quatre-Vents. Thank you so much for being here, Justin. It's good to see you.
Yes, it's always fun to hang out with Catalyst and to be teaching here today. So,
That's
my
wonderful.
pleasure.
I'm so
Yeah.
glad you're here. And if anybody doesn't know me, I'm Nikki Koval. I'm the director of Catalyst Story Institute and also have been a supervising producer of the festival over the years. If you would like to weigh in, ask any questions during our broadcast today, you can always sign in at streamyard.com/Facebook to give permission for us to see your picture and your name if you would like to do it that way, or just write a little comment below in the comment section and ask us a question, and I will keep my eyes peeled for that, and we'll involve you in our process today. So, Justin, would you tell us just a little bit about Quatre-Vents as we start off?
Yeah. So Quatre-Vents is the new company that we started. Me and Elizabeth Chatelain. We're both editors and directors. We've done a lot of documentaries. Specifically, I've done also a lot of editing and narrative work. And we both post-produce a lot of our own stuff. And what we decided to do, because we've heard of as soon as we heard of the amazing incentives up in northern Minnesota, which I heard of when I went to Catalyst Festival. As Nikki, you probably know that, but we decided it only made sense to start a business and do post-production as everything becomes more remote there. So we started Quatre-Vents so our clients, not us, can take advantage of those incentives. So you can learn more. I won't go into too much about the incentives here, but UMFO, Upper Minnesota Film
Midwest
Office.
Film Office, yeah.
I always forget if it's Midwest or Minnesota.
Upper Midwest Film Office, yes. Sharon did a lovely live broadcast with us that you can find in our library and was talking all about how you can work with your film office. So thank you for tipping your cap to that. It sounds like there's a lot of cool projects starting to come to Minnesota and continuing to move through that process and take advantage of those incentives. So it's really exciting to know we've got a production office, post-production office based there to do that work.
Yeah, and we're going to be bringing one of a major network working in post-production there very shortly. We just signed the paperwork the other day. So
congratulations. That's very exciting stuff.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so that's Quatre-Vents. Fourwind Films is my production company. That is just the sister company. So they're virtually the same thing, just run them with different people. So, and then we're based out in New York, and that's where we get a lot of our work that both Beth and I have done in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to just jump into.
Oh, sure. You can absolutely jump right in. I was just going to share with everyone that what will be coming up soon is the next chapters of this, which are not in this order per se, but might be. You never know. Also, color and sound and graphics and VFX we will cover as we go through this 4-part course with Justin. We're so excited to have you here, and take it away.
Yeah, and as Nikki said too, the reason why we're doing all of these things is I post-produce a lot of different things, and I've done it from an independent standpoint for a long time, directing my own stuff, helping out friends, working on different things now for various things. I started out in independent documentaries, as I mentioned, worked for PBS, Frontline, HBO, working for Netflix, a Netflix supported project currently. And I've had 2 projects picked up by HBO. And so what I just want to talk about mostly today is my favorite thing and my most thing I spend most of my time doing, which is editing. And I think the first thing that you need to think of when editing is your timeline and how to budget for what you do need in post. It always takes longer than you think in post, except for if you've been doing it a long time. Then you kind of expect things to take this long. So I'm just going to go over what different kind of projects could take. So for documentaries take a lot longer than narrative films, and that's because you don't have a script ready. Documentaries are done very differently depending, and this includes unscripted or reality shows. Um, if a producer creates a script for the editor to work off, your edit is going to be shortened considerably. A lot of times, things turn out a little better the more freedom that you give your editor and more time you give the editor. But producers do a great job at creating stories, and they know how to set those things up. It usually takes about 2 months to cut like 30 minutes. The longer that your piece is, let's say if you have an hour documentary show, that goes up exponentially. A feature film that's 70 to 90 minutes long almost always takes a year cutting documentaries. Possibly you can speed that up if a lot of it's scripted to 4 to 6 months. And that's usually, with an editor and an assistant editor and maybe some other help with an assistant or something. If you just have an editor alone, that could take longer because they're doing all the assistant work. Then again, it can take even longer. It took us for an hour episode of Frontline, a very intense documentary on PBS that used a lot of verite footage. Verite, if you guys don't know, is unscripted, not interview based, and just following characters around. That took us about a year and a half, spread between 2 or 3 editors and several post assistants that helped with that.
Thank you for defining that for those of us who would pretend to be like, verite. Yeah, totally know what that is. Thank you.
Yeah. And there's a lot of different kinds of docs with, just like there's a lot of different kinds of narratives. So, but the non-scripted narratives usually take a little bit shorter. If you can think, if you're really cruising through something and you have a good support system with your AEs, you might be able to finish something in a month if you're really going at it hard. For pilots, we're going to kind of concentrate a little bit more on creating pilots and different things today. That can always vary. You're not always, when you go into a pitch meeting, if you have shot something, you might not always complete a whole pilot. That used to be the case a long time ago. Now they just really want to see proof of concept, and the more you can give them, the better. But the idea is you're pitching to people who see the best entertainment in front of them, and they have to choose between lots of great choices. So in order to stand out above the rest, well, we'll get to that, I guess, how to stand out. So stay tuned. But let's talk about the things that are important in order for you to get there first, to get to the hard part that most people don't do. Number one is you have to stay organized. You have to, having an assistant editor saves you money. Don't think that hiring an editor without an assistant is going to save you money, because assistants usually cost, it depends on their skill level, but close to a half to maybe 1/3 to 2/3 of the price of an editor. And they're going to be doing the same things those editor can do. Also, your editor is going to be able to concentrate a lot more on their creativity if they're not concentrating on technical aspects of editing. And there are a lot of technical aspects. And the more I've been in the business and I train in new people, I realize how many things there are to memorize or figure out in each individual software that you use, or just in general. So in order to keep steady and keep going forward, organize bins and think about how your organization is going to happen before you start editing. So that means like logging. If you interrupt me whenever, Nikki, for anything.
Yeah, I'm having been through this process as a creator and an EP who produced her own series with 20 episodes and then knew she would be the only person who could edit it for free. The importance of media management is so key. Label everything properly so that I could hand it off and it could be found, and I could say it's this take and it's this number, and there was, it was all cataloged the proper way is so key, because any kind of back and forth with that, like when you're talking about budgeting for time, any note rounds, any just the fact that you're going to be setting yourself up in pre-production for post-production. You're talking about making sure that you know what that timeline is going to be and what your goals are based off of that. And also the fact that when you go into it, did you know what you wanted? If you're trying to do some apocalyptic, I don't know, this is sort of apocalyptic green lighting behind me, but if you're setting it up for that way, will your light setup give you what you want, or did you decide afterwards, oh, let's kind of decide what we want now? You can't hand to post and then take that stuff out. You have to be able to know from the beginning where you want to end up and reverse engineer, right?
Hmm. And everything takes time. And the other thing is too, people are always feel like they're in a rush in post. You're
Usually because
not.
they're out of budget as well.
Yeah, yeah, but you can't be in a rush because it takes time. You're organizing a story with exactly what you have, and you almost always go back to the original stuff once you get to the end when you do fine fixing, especially if you're smart. And we'll get to like test audiences later, but if you do
Mhm.
test audiences, a lot of times you need to clarify your story and make. And one thing you're always trying to do is to make things clear to as wide of an audience as possible. If somebody is confused,
Mhm.
there's very likely many people are going to be confused by that same section when they watch it,
Right.
including your executives that might see it.
Mhm. And that
Um,
does, just for those who haven't done it yet, knowing that editing is a particular budget for a particular timeline for a particular, I knew what I wanted when I came to the table, I handed you what I wanted, we noticed some things were off, we took a note round, whatever. Beyond what is agreed upon, there is additional cost, right? When it goes over time, it extends the timeline of what we wanted, your time costs a particular amount of money. And if we go beyond what is there, it's not that we can't, but we need to make sure that we know that the best we can set ourselves up in pre-production, or the best we can set ourselves up when we do the handoff, the more we shrink that timeline or stay on that timeline, stay on that budget, and protect ourselves from ballooning at that point.
Exactly. And so a lot of what you should think about ahead of time is how is the story going to be organized? How are you telling this story? I'll just give a couple quick examples of how I've organized projects in the past. A lot of the times when you're telling a documentary or um, a feature script's a little easier because you already have things marked off in scenes and takes, and that's how you should organize it almost always. I can't think of unless you're doing something very experimental. Most narratives you're going to organize by scenes and takes, and be able to refer back to what you've done and refer back to set notes via scenes and takes in the same way. For non-scripted or nonfiction material in general, you have to think: are we telling the story by certain places? I've working on a feature documentary that has 7 different locations that we use, and everything's sorted into those locations. And then we talk about certain subjects in each location, so it's further uh, organized by those subjects. Other times, we're following a group of people. Let's say I worked on Rock and a Hard Place, a thing with Dwayne Johnson, a documentary that he was a producer on and appeared in. Well, that we were following a group of inmates for a 60-day period. So we labeled our shoot days by chronologically, and that's very common in the documentary world. If you're doing a reality TV show, if you have set scenes set up, you might want to organize it by that. Or if it is really character based, maybe you want to have selects by certain characters. So just think through everything that you need to organize, not just how you're going to recall the footage. You also want to think about, before you start shooting, what's going to help your workflow. By the way you name files, it's unbelievable how many conversations that we have to have with large groups about how to name files in the camera and how that
Yes.
workflow is going to go. But it's very important. It saves a lot of time.
Mhm.
It's worth having those meetings ahead of time.
Absolutely,
Um,
and also asking you, what will you need? Will you want this by location? Will you want this by
mhm.
wide shot, medium, or two shot, or close up? How do you need us to set this up so that it's not, you're not being handed a bucket of takes and trying to, do the math from there? Because that's time. That's time.
Exactly. And that's the other thing too, is like medium shot, close up, a moving camera shot. That might be a way that you might want to organize if that's how you're going to be thinking about cutting the piece. Uh,
Mhm.
so Yeah, and I think the other thing is too, whenever you're making organization in computer files, try to make it read the way that you would read anything else, that it sorts from top to bottom.
Mhm.
Your newest thing is at the bottom, or your newest thing is always at the top. A lot of times I put the year first, followed by the month and the day when I'm sorting by chronologically by something. If I'm
Mhm.
sorting by like episodes, you want to have the episode at the front of the file name, possibly. And you want to keep that consistent, not just when you bring the files in, but through your string outs, your selects, and then finally into your segment edits and into your longer timelines that
Can
will
you
become.
define what those are for those who are new to the
Sure.
realm, newer producers?
So a lot of the first thing that you do, I'll just quickly go through, not too detailed, but you sync the footage. You bring in all the footage. You sync the footage. Then you're going to have a new set of possibly files that will be your synced footage that you will likely string out, um, just in a line so you can scrub through the timeline, however you want to organize it in a full timeline so you can see every single shot. From there, often you pick selects from that. A lot of times, if the AE can do that, they will often help you do that, if you can get a more creative AE. Or a lot of times, if we were when I was working on Axios, which was a news show that sometimes we cut the whole show in 3 days, the producers would help do that, because they were on set and we'd take their notes, and the AEs would just take those selects and throw them in the timeline, and we'd start from there. But either way, your selects come from that. Um, Following the selects, that's when you start making rough cuts and edits, and save your rough cuts and edits. Whenever I think, oh, I might want to go back to this change that I made, duplicate the timeline. I've got, sometimes hundreds of the same timeline, repeated, and think about how you can organize those. So again, it appears oldest in the top and the newest at the bottom, or vice versa. So that answers everything that quickly.
Absolutely. It's all very helpful. Just knowing that there is a process, right? You're syncing sound and you're realizing, oh wait, we never got sound on this one, or this wasn't in sync, or this is the one with that noise. We're not going to use it.
Hmm.
Constantly refining the bucket of files that you're pulling from, the bucket of takes or whatever that is, and refining as you go. It helps for you to know that inside and out as you're conversing with your editors, so that you're not handing them a thing and going, oh, I hope I like what you put together, and then having no direction, right? The
Exactly.
better focused we are on where we want to go, the clearer it is for you to execute that and then offer adjustments and um, realize how many issues there might be and what we're going to fix in post, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Some people get really mad when you say fix and post
Mhm.
later, because you can only do with what you get. I don't
Right.
mind it, because you do fix some things in post, but
Of course.
it's always something you hear all the time. It's funny.
It's a
Um,
triggering phrase for some people who are like,
yes,
no,
yes.
fix it now. Fix it before it goes to post. Just do it right. And then we ended
Um,
up.
yeah, yeah, and I think we actually talked about a lot of those things in the seminar that we had at the festival this year.
Right.
Um, but what I was going to say too is, not all the editing in general. There's a lot of technical things that we're talking about, but it's a lot of fun, and you can do a lot of things very quickly that, you really see how movies get made, and we're getting to that. So just stay tuned. I don't want to.
Alienate anyone in the vocab.
Yeah, don't think everything's about organization. Organization helps,
Sure.
just like in anything, what you do. Sometimes people try to jump into editing faster just because you can just drag something in the timeline and start looking at it, but it's a bad idea, and that's kind of what we're going
Right.
through this for.
It also makes the
Um,
script supervisor's job like really important to make sure that we know even from set which takes we liked, so we're tracking those through.
yeah, and a lot of people work differently. A lot of people are like, "Oh, let the editor um, judge what's going on." And a lot of editors like to do that anyway. I'm one of those editors. I watch everything. Walter Murch talks about, he watches everything
Mhm.
before they're done. Jeff Bart's one of the most famous documentary film editors at HBO. He sits down and watches everything. And people have different ways of taking notes or doing these processes, um, that, well, we'll get into now. What you kind of watch for when you get into the story is what interests you, and it can be anything. Okay, so anything that interests you, that's sort of what I put in my first selects when I'm like watching It doesn't matter if it's nonfiction or fiction film. You know, if somebody moves their eyebrow in a certain way or they smile differently, and you're like, that could mean this. If I need the film to have this character react like that, it's an option. So you put it in your select so you can remember that, and maybe you can see it when you scroll through. But you don't have to go through all of the takes that seem like it didn't touch you or affect you at all.
Mm-hmm.
And this is
Absolutely.
also a good point where you can use other people in the room to get those reactions, because you want to know what makes people react in your footage. Um, so
Absolutely.
yeah, and that includes like going through verite footage where people are filming people doing things in everyday life, like brushing their teeth. It's the way they close the cabinet. Was that interesting? I mean, you can get to really minute things that can offer little surprises in films. But a lot of times you're finding bigger things and finding the right soundbite or the way somebody said something perfectly. Um, so yeah, then um, I guess you go through that, and you kind of, what I usually do is whittle it down a lot. Some people can kind of construct an edit where they'll take the most interesting things and they'll build off of that. So I know an editor where he works on the most important scene of the film first, and then
Mhm.
he works to get to that scene and to make that scene what the maximize its potential. I like to work from the beginning and uh, kind of see where the edit takes me so it all feels continuous and flowing.
Mhm.
Um, and once you kind of get an edit built up, that's a lot of the editors, spending time with the footage and constructing it how they like it. Usually you have the editor do an edit the first round, whatever they want. Sometimes producers, especially when it's tight, the producers will tell you exactly what to do. And that's
Mhm.
faster. But then you're not really getting to see the person who knows the footage the most on what they think that the edit should be. A lot of times, um, you get a better result that way if you let the editor do something on the first round, um,
Would
depending
you
on what that
say
is.
Sorry, would you say that the timeline of you this is probably case by case too. If you're doing a doc, it's gonna be much different that you're going through all that footage, but in terms of a percentage of the timeline that you're spending, if you do have a year that you're working on
Mm.
a doc piece, how much of the time is you just pouring through the inventory, doing all of that, cinching of the files and taking your notes? Is that
Yeah.
25%? Is that half?
Yeah, it really depends on the team you're working with. So, like I said, if the producers or directors really set something out and say, let's throw this together, and you see something, that could be like a quarter of the time. If
Mhm.
the editor is like going through everything and um, really getting something tighter, it could be 50 to 75% of the time before you have a good rough cut.
Right.
Obviously, you're going to be closer to the final product um, if you spend that much time doing the first initial rough edit. Um, but it can vary a lot. It's but yeah, I would say probably not sooner than 25%. Otherwise, you probably didn't spend enough
Right.
time on it, and you
It's
wouldn't
just
want to. You
be
have a lot of
familiar.
work to do after the first assembly,
Yeah.
so you're not done once you get that first assembly. That's for sure.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. There's many miles yet to go.
Yeah. Um, but once you do get that first assembly, what you can kind of do is what you should do next is show it to people. And the important thing to remember, one thing that I didn't mention earlier that I did want to mention is before you start, you should say, who is our target audience? Who are the people that are going to watch this? That's the most important. Are you making a kids show? Who's your target audience for that? What's the age range that's going to watch this? Also, number two, all kids shows have a target audience that are not kids. They are the parents, and those are the people who are going to be putting the kids in front of the television set to watch this. So really think about who needs to really, really watch this in order for it to be made a success. Um, Try to get your test audience, who's next, to be part of that group. Um, but you obviously can show it to a variety of different people. But if you're focused on uh, you should always have a defined type of audience that you're aiming for. And the tighter that is, the more precise that is, the better, because that's also how a lot of networks think.
Mhm.
Is this going to be, um, 20-year-old um, immigrants who live in New York City? I mean, maybe that's exactly who a specific channel's audience is, or is it kids 4 through 6 and their parents,
Mhm.
um, who live in suburban areas? Um, and then you want to start showing not only to your internal team, is always the first people who get to see things, but once you get it to a certain point where your whole team is ready, you almost always want to show it to somebody. And everybody's notes are relevant. It doesn't matter if they're part of that group or not. Um, Anybody who watches your show represents a lot of other people who react and watch television in a similar manner that those people do. And
Mhm.
this is really where you get to really defining how good your show is. A lot of times your show is um, has all great things in it, and you love everything that's in it. Um, but most often, that's too much for an audience
Right.
to capture them for a long period of time, because,
Mhm.
as everybody knows, there's a lot of competition for your time. You're competing with TikTok,
For
you're
sure.
competing executives with the next meeting they have to go to, and all of these things. And right now, we're competing for those executives who are seeing all of these great materials. Probably the hardest people to get their attention out of anybody on the planet. That's why they have that job.
Right.
Um,
So testing it, having a clarity of who your audience is, that's going to dictate the tone you're leaning into, the kind of pace, and those kinds of things that you're going to play with. But then also sharing it beyond that audience to see what because you do need your audience, but you also hope that that expands because people like your piece. So sharing it with
exactly.
others who are also consuming content is key as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so the more people that you show it to, the better. Yeah, it really doesn't hurt. And there's some good questions. There's a Oscar nominated and multi Emmy winning director that I work with often. He says the first thing that you should ask is, what do you remember from what you saw? If they say something and you keep hearing that, you ask a bunch of people that and they keep saying the same thing, don't cut that out from your film. That's when you push back from the executives being like, this is, we've actually tested this on a bunch of people, and that's the part that they respond to. If nobody says that and the executive tells you to cut it out, it's probably a good reason to agree with the executive and to cut it out, or whatever.
Mhm.
Or your producing team or whoever. And if you have a dispute on something, go and test it on an audience. Don't lead them with questions. Just ask them, what do you remember? What threw you off or distract them? Like, I know that, we were, me and my wife was pregnant last year, and we would watch something where they just had a kid, and like the wife who had just had a kid that week is like running around and acting like everything is normal 2 days after
She's
she
like,
delivered a baby, and we're like,
no,
whoa,
no.
just a second, that doesn't make any sense. And it takes you out of the story. You're not sucked in, and you're thinking about something that has nothing to do with the story. You're like, that's wrong. um,
Mhm.
so those things are important, and audience members do know that. If a fridge is open in one scene, you cut away and cut back, and the fridge is closed, and you didn't hear a sound effect or something, then that can be distracting. It can be as small as that, and you want to get rid of as many of those distractions as possible, because you want to get people sucked into what you're telling them and follow along in the story.
Absolutely. I know I'm always watching the corner of the person who's not talking in like a dirty
Yeah.
over the shoulder, and I'm constantly being like, "That person's jaw isn't tracking," and that stuff will
Mhm.
bother me, but your layman audience won't necessarily know what it is that's off, but they
Mhm.
will be bumped and distracted. They might not be able to put their fingers on it, but they'll be like, "Ooh, that didn't track. Something about that just felt weird to me, and I don't really know what it is." We're such great barometers for BS that we just go, I didn't like that. I don't know why, but something about that was wrong. So it's good to know and to track those things to make sure that you're asking and engaging with your audience to
Yeah,
be
and
sure.
the more of those, some of those things you can't get rid of, but everything that you can, do it. It takes time, and that's a lot of the hard work. They say often, um, what we're chatting about now, that the hardest part and the most important part is the last 1% of the film, because that's what really sets you apart.
Yep.
It's easy to get something to 90% where it looks like a finished product, and you say color it and mix it, and you're done. But it's really to get a story really tight and running smoothly and understood by the most amount of people. It's fixing all of the small things that you can. Um, and the more time that you have to do that, obviously, the better.
Right.
Um,
Right. We can
so,
see that kind of clarity. We can hear that kind of clarity, but we also sense it. We feel it as an audience that the time
mhm.
has been taken to really finesse those transitions and pace and all that kind of stuff. Well
Yeah,
said.
and I think Nikki's example of, um, over the shoulder talking that doesn't match with the mouth. I mean,
Yes, yes.
I notice that all the time, and you're like, "Oh, that's pretty cheap. I guess it works." But shows that have been on television for 2 or 3 seasons can get away with that more because you already have them sucked in. But especially when
Right.
you're making a pilot, or what we're talking about, like a concept video piece that you're going to bring to a very important meeting, think about those things.
Right.
So,
Right. Make sure you have those moments tight on set because you won't get a second shot to sort of flub it. If it wants to be, if you know that when you're making it that this is a proof of concept or a sizzle moment, really make sure that everything is clean before you move on.
yeah, and then the other thing that you want to ask audience members, that's probably, besides, what's the most important part, what I think is the most important part and the most obvious thing that people don't spend enough time in post is, where does it drag? Where do I get caught where it's not exciting all the time? The best things that
Mhm.
you've ever seen, they don't stop moving. There might be
Right.
slow parts in a film, and you see often in, like, ramble sometimes, but I think this is really important. You see in, like, short films, people like sit in a room or watch people walk away for a long time. Those moments of silence that you see in art films or different things, a lot of times those things are very much earned. Um, and so it's setting up either to have space where you need to have space in your film to think
Mhm.
about what you've just seen,
Right.
or you're setting something up where something really big happens after something. But I mean, that's a bad example because I shouldn't even don't even think about the last thing I said. But a lot of times you have
Well,
to earn those moments of pause, those
yeah.
moments of nothing's happening.
Things
Uh,
have to be going at a certain clip to change the tempo to then
mhm.
slow it down for people to go, "Oh, wow, what a breath. That's wonderful. We were really churning along there." There's, Baby Driver, I just saw a clip of the beginning. Have you seen Baby Driver, of that whole thing that's
All the
edited to
time.
music? And it's all in tempo, and, like, it's a heist thing, and they're going, 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 and it's all very fast, and then you get to the moment of, like, "We did it." But only because your blood pressure was going so quickly and your heart rate was going so quickly for so long, does that pause then become earned for the audience to go, "Whew, that was a ride," right? It's like the
Yeah,
roller coaster coming to back into the station.
and I think a lot of the things that when you see in film, the beginning of films are very important. A lot of films that you go to see, um, they have something that might already have you hooked. They might have a star that's already, um, in it. If you have a star, you might want to think about, how are you bringing the entrance, because people are going to be expecting to see that star when you
Right.
come to the film. So that's something that you can maybe play off, or play slowly. Or, Tarantino always says, catch their attention right at the beginning. A lot of his best scenes, I mean, Inglorious Bastard is, I think, a great example. But he puts very intense scenes right at the beginning of your film.
Mhm.
In the 90s, a lot of times you saw these very slow beginnings where they're getting the credits and everything. That was back when you know that you're going to sit in a theater for a long time. And also, those are usually by really big. I mean, the one that always comes into mind that I think is one with Meryl Streep, um, Sophie's Choice. It
Oh
starts
yeah.
out very slow, going through Brooklyn and all these things, and it can remind you of the 90s, how slow it goes through, or The Sandlot, um,
Mhm.
panning through different things on the shelves. Um, those are using, number one, like memories of the past to start out the film. Really great score because they've already hired an amazing composer, and they know that you're there to see these stars or the director who's already made this film. So
Right.
that might not be an advantage that you have going into a pitch meeting unless you're
Mhm.
already a big name or you have a big name um, on your show. Um, so that's one thing. I mean, I've cut pitch things where we did have a big name and we set up a scene where we we really set up what we're going to go see, but right away we catch the executive's attention with that person's name. I don't want to say exactly what we did because I don't think I'm not sure if they would want me to, but
Yeah.
uh, the show eventually did get picked up, but we teased saying the name of it was nonfiction, so
Mhm.
it was a documentary um, of what was going on, but we didn't show the person's face until several minutes into the trailer, and we thought about how to setting that up
Right.
with what was shot and what we cut. Um, so you always want to, exactly what Nikki said, get to speed up the tempo, and then you can be rolling downhill from there.
Mhm.
It's easier to draw people in first, and then keep them going on the ride.
Right.
Um,
It's a
so
it's a very specific choice to slowly ease the car out and say, "We're gonna be spending all of this time in Ireland, and there nothing is rushed and nothing is hurried." That's a very different thing than like, "Hey, we're in New York. We gotta move. We gotta go. Things are fast.
Mhm,
Things are, trains are coming and going. People are coming and going. We got places to be." That's all dictated by the writing, but also the setting and the location. It's so key for you all to be aware of New York energy versus Hawaii versus any of these other things, right? What is the pace of the action, and what is the tempo of the location, as well as in the era of TikTok attention spans, how long before
mhm.
we lose them if we haven't gotten them on the ride, right?
Exactly, and the other thing is too, it's like, if you're in a place like Ireland, just because you're cutting slower or that's the style of the film, that doesn't mean that you're not catching the audience's attention. I mean, let's just say, just because we said Ireland, Banshees of Inisherin is in the
Yeah.
Oscars right now.
Yep.
Um, I believe you start out seeing Colin Farrell immediately in the film, and you know that him and I always say the wrong
Oh,
Gleason, but
yeah, Brendan Gleeson.
Brendan Gleeson
Yep.
is coming up soon, and you're seeing the beautiful things of Ireland, and you're hearing a great score, and Martin McDonagh has directed the film.
Yep.
Um, so, but as if you're an unknown person doing the same thing, think about how can you create a long shot that's interesting, that might catch the viewer's attention right away, or
Mhm.
what is the character going to do aside from walking that is going to bring you into the story quickly and start telling the story faster rather than later.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
and a lot of those things too, when I'm cutting like a nonfiction thing, I'm looking for what can we put in the opening. If your opening for a narrative film isn't working, think about the most exciting scene that you have. Maybe you want to stick that as a teaser at the beginning, throw a little bit of that. Maybe you want to put a graphic treatment on it and go a little crazy. Um, there's like an example of that might be, I mean, I think Tank Girl is like a 90s film, it's an action film. Um,
Mhm.
they have a pretty exciting opening scene, but even after that, they have a very graphic novel ish type of opening credits.
Right.
So, uh, and almost all reality shows open with pretty snazzy editing with um, some kind of motion graphics along with it.
Mhm.
So, just think of different ways that you can bring somebody in quickly into your story. The first part is also probably the hardest part of any story, and it takes the longest to put together. Once you have kind of the ball rolling, then you can kind of go from there.
Mhm.
Hopefully, I'm not hanging on this too long, but
No, it's great. I'm just winding my way through the banners, keeping up. good.
And then the next hardest part, like I said, is the last 1%. So the getting it going. And then after that, a lot of times you're putting in all of the interesting things that you see. You get it to a point where you're like, there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. You can feel where the climax is. Probably you have planned that climax out. If you just know your story, you're going to know what is the most climaxy part of your story. And that's what you're aiming for.
Right.
You want to make the climax hit as hard as you can and leave audiences feel satisfied for what they saw. Now, being satisfied, I don't mean like you're going to see a David Lynch film and feel the same as when you go see a romantic comedy.
Right.
You're going to be satisfied that you went to see something disturbing and you got that, or it feels like it was a real life dream and you feel off-putting or something. That's satisfying the audience, the target audience that you have.
Yeah. What's the payoff we've been driving toward? And this is the moment where we're seeing the character fight for what they want and get it, or seeing them go to the battle we've been talking about. How does that momentum arrive at a moment that then has a payoff?
Yeah, and so then this last 1%, you are focusing on making those the most important parts of your story shine as brightly as they possibly can. If you have variability on the time that you can show people, now you have a lot more variability even in final deliverables once you are picked up by a network. But if you're going to an executive and pitching something, you can make it whatever you want. On the show, nonfiction show that we got picked up, well, I can say what that was. That was Axios. Ended up winning an Emmy and everything. But we for that, we did short little segments, and we would talk in between when we pitched those segments. Or the two directors would chat about what we were going to see, because we didn't have a lot of the transitions, or we didn't have a budget to create, pay the animators. We could get really interesting footage and really interesting access and cut them into very, very tight scenes. Well, we got it into probably 25 minutes of very tight scenes. And then we decided to only show, no, we had longer than that. We had like 40 minutes of tight scenes. And I think we ended up showing 20 minutes or 15 or 20 minutes.
Right.
So when you bring it in, you feel like everything's great. For a final product, usually you're going to cut out 20% of that before it's going to feel the best that you ever felt it could be. If you think something's good, I've worked on so many projects where you're like, there's so much good content here, but there's so much surrounding it, nobody's going to feel the same. A lot of directors get very attached to whatever they've done. And as an editor, you feel that all the time. You're like, we got to pull stuff out here and things are going to sing. You just have to try it without losing clarity so that the audience can follow your story. Because again, anytime that an audience is confused or distracted, it's not just, lip flap or something else. If they're not following the story that you're telling, they're not going to be thinking about the story. They're stuck on that point where they got lost and they're missing the next part. So sometimes you have to repeat or give hints to certain parts of the story that are key to your story. And that's what you're injecting in this last 1% to try to make things clearer. Other times very often you're pulling extraneous things out, things that might be very close, seem different that they're saying, but they're very close in ideas that you're trying to get across. There are two things that are interesting, but they might be conflicting just a little bit. You keep one in that helps the climax the most, that your audience is going to pay attention to the most, the one that they remember the most and they tell you about. And you can ask people about if you have a conflicting thing where you don't know if this is important, this is important. When you have your test audience, ask them that question, but let them talk first and ask that as the final thing. What did you think about when we talked about turtles? Did you understand that they lay eggs? And then they might say, oh, I remember that they said the Galapagos turtle lays eggs in January. Or that's probably not a true fact because I just made it up. But
don't share that anywhere, kids. Do your homework.
But those are the things that you're paying attention to, and slowly you're whittling it down or plucking things or massaging to really get the highest impact on what you're doing. And because you're going into a pitch meeting, you can tell them exactly what they're going to see and what's finished. If you don't have money for color correction, that's perfect. As long as it's not completely distracting, like going from blue to orange to blue back and forth, you might not need to do that. You'd be like, we don't have color done on this. But it's good enough as is. And they're going to know. They often watch cuts that are not color corrected, more so now. But the further that you can push it to polish it, I mean, color correcting before you go in isn't a bad idea. It's not always practical.
Two of the things that you mentioned, I just want to circle back on, because I think on the one hand, editing is a letting go process for the team, right? That you're handing your baby off to someone else if it's not you, and it's a letting go process. In the same way that you have a script, and by the time it goes to production, there's going to be other layers of notes. The concept in your head is not going to be what you shoot entirely. There'll be other things that get added or things that get taken out or whatever. And by the time it gets to another layer of another person's vision or another person's filter on that vision, it's going to get adjustments and additions as well, and expand and contract in certain places. And so there's an element of, like you say, if there's two moments that really feel important, well, are they going to cancel each other out because they're both of equal weight? And you have to make those choices. You have to decide where to cut the fat, where to keep it lean, but also just allowing it to improve by subjecting it to those questions, that audience, to say, well, which one did you care about more, right?
Yeah, and exactly. And one thing, we're keeping it kind of vague here because we're talking to probably creators. I don't know if we're also talking to people who are in post-production or producers, but it can be different for everyone. Like a director is going to guide this through all the way to the end, and they're the final say because they know the vision and the line that we're keeping towards, and the final product that they have in their head that they're directing the editor to. But the editor is as important as the cinematographer, and is the head of a department. The editor is as important as the producer. They're the head of the department, and they're controlling the part that they know the best, which is how to organize a story and tell it most effectively through tools.
Right. And I do think, like what you said about sharing it with an audience is an element of removing it from yourself. It's kind of giving the project, I keep wanting to say baby, but you're giving the project to other eyes to sort of filter it. Because what ends up happening is, I know for myself, I wrote all the episodes, I produced the episodes, I was acting in some of them, and so then I was editing. At a certain point, I had to hand that off to for people to tell me, I'm already ahead of that joke. I saw that coming because you did there was a big wind up in that person's episode. And I went, oh, but I love the face they make. And they were like, we don't need it. We were already there, right? Someone to tell you how to take the air out, because we've spent so much time with it. We think all of it is precious if we're not careful. So having those layers of filters, knowing your audience, having an editor with a keen eye to say, oh, we don't need that. We have that look, or we have that line, so we don't need that reaction. Any of those things help to refine and really give an economy of screen time to each beat and each moment.
Yeah, and exactly what Nikki is saying is that a lot of this comes with experience. And so what you get a lot of times, first-time directors or first time you're doing a pitch and bringing it to a network, is that you think that there's all of these important things and you've worked so hard, especially the first time. It's like, the first time that you have a birthday party, you don't want it ever to end. Yeah. And you want everybody to enjoy every little bit. You think, oh, you're going to throw it on the editing floor. Nobody's going to get to enjoy that thing that we got on the floor. Correct. But you don't care if they enjoy that moment. You care if they enjoy your movie. You care if when you're going in to pitch something, you don't care if the executive saw that moment. You care if they're going to pick it up. And in order to do that, you have to have your movie at the most effective it can possibly be. And that's what you should always be aiming for. And so editors really know, the good editors know how to enhance this certain parts. And there's things that you can add to enhance things, but it's really a lot of it's limiting everything to get to advance the story along always, and always be adding to the story every moment of the film. And it's just a lot easier to do. Film is a team working art form, because telling a story like that is very difficult. You're not in the room when people watch it. You're not physically in control, and you can't react to how people are reacting to the film in real time and change something. So you have to take all the times that people are reacting to those moments, before you have a final product, in order to shape it.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually remember I took a class, or a seminar, I think it was, with one of the editors of Broad City, and I remember him saying, there's funny moments that happen. It's a comedy, right? And
Yeah.
so when we were talking before about continuity, and sometimes we're like, oh, that bumps me a little bit. I remember him saying, story over continuity if you have to. You want both, but if you don't have both, if somebody's swinging a pillow and this time that person falls this way or that way, you're hoping that it's consistent if you can get it that way, and if that someone has spent that time on set to make sure, oh no, this time you fell left and last time it was this way. Let's make sure we get that right when we go, we change to the next angle. But story first, continuity as close as it can be to that,
Yeah.
right? So that you just don't pop anybody out of the story.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, if the story goes on and it's not important, like if it's something funny and you're gonna get a laugh out of it, people aren't gonna be worried about continuity.
Right.
If it's really important. But also, the more really good editors know how to get around most all of that stuff. I mean, there's a lot of different things. I know that we have about 9 minutes left, right? 8 minutes.
Roughly, yeah.
So we'll probably not get to go through a lot of tips or tricks, but there's I'll kind of try to go through quickly some things. Using match on action, you can look that up anywhere. Using sound effects to make cuts, using music to motivate cuts. There's a lot of different things to get through problems that there are in edits, because there's problems in almost every edit. I know, I mean, it's a very specific thing, but like David Fincher, a lot of times he wants to use two different or certain takes. He'll combine two different shots in order to make an edit work where he has both performances that he wants, but he doesn't move the camera a lot, but he knows that gives him some advantage in doing it cheaply in post-production. Right. So, and the more that you work with your style and you stick to your style, I think that's the main thing. That's what you have the director for, is if the director still says this is in the style, this is something, and your director and your editor know what that style is, you can get around a lot of stuff. And that stuff, that's really important, because you can't fix everything in post, but you can do a lot, and you can make things work maybe in a different way.
Right.
So be open to that, and
solve the problem on set whenever you can. Take the extra moment, move the light, make sure you got the body on the right side of the camera or whatever. If you're worried about the golden rule and all those things, try to fix that on set. But if you can't, talented people like yourself know a few things about how to work around if they must.
Yeah. And sometimes it seems like, oh, this is way too long. This entire scene is dragging. When I was younger, it was a comedy, and this guy says, oh, you can cut from here to here in this scene, and nobody's going to notice. And so I made the cut. I'm like, yeah, that works great. And now the scene plays way better. It's just like, oh, there goes a minute. And sometimes you just want to be like, well, that whole section sucks. I don't need to go in there and try to find golden nuggets and try to save them. Just if you look, sometimes you want to look really small, but sometimes you can look bigger for really big fixes.
What other tips and tricks do you have? We don't have to be too worried about the timeline. I'm sure folks would love to know whatever gems you would like to share.
Sorry, I keep getting caught in my chair. This coat keeps getting caught in my chair.
Dangerous.
Yeah, well, I mean, one other thing that I learned, if we're talking about comedy, I cut a comedy. It was actually the same one when I was younger. And to be honest, one of my favorite comedians was in it, John Early. He's now in Search Party and different things. and he was hilarious. I actually shot the movie too, and I was like laughing on set the whole time. So I thought, oh, his jokes are funny. You know, I am his audience. Well, in the end, we left in a lot of the improv and different things. But it took me a long time to get to this other editor who said, oh, we can cut out some of this stuff. And I think one thing to remember too is there were a lot of laughs in there, and we played it in theater sometimes, and I noticed people were laughing a lot of times over the next joke. So even if things are funny in comedies, if you don't leave room for, if you just have wall-to-wall jokes, that
Yeah.
might affect on how people perceive the film depending on who laughs at what jokes, because they might miss the next story point or they might miss the next laugh, and that's not really great, because then you can't predict audience to audience how your film is going to hit.
Yeah.
Even if it is funny, it's not the always the best way to tell the story. And so you learn things like that by showing the film more. And I can't tell you how many times after directors, especially first, second time, and even third time directors, once they show the film 100 times and they don't get the audience to react like they thought they would, how much they wish they would have cut something out. That's
Right.
the number one thing. So I
It's
think,
instinctual too, I think, that most people watch the same way. Most people, if they're going to laugh, will laugh in the same place, right?
mhm.
And that, um, it's I'm hearing from Bodie Werner who's going, "Keep dropping those gems." But I think that it's interesting because most people, if they're going to laugh, will laugh in the same place. They may not laugh the same size, right? Sometimes it's also, if you're showing two people, they're going to laugh differently than a room of 50 people might laugh. Because if everyone is around you laughing, you might, you know, you might be
Yeah,
more encouraged to laugh a little bit louder. We all know that from stand up, where sometimes if it's a house of four people, everything's like, oh, okay. But if it's a room full of people who have all been drinking, that is hilarious, right? Like, and you ride on those waves. So I think specifically with comedy, it's so key to get groups of eyeballs on it to see if it's really landing in that way.
yeah. And the thing is, like with stand up, I've cut a lot of stand up things too, and so I've filmed a few, and you see people deliver the same things. If people are laughing, they can just wait an extra 2 seconds to make sure they get their next point. They can repeat it again. When you're telling a story and you're telling a plot point, and you have your biggest laugh right before you tell the next plot point, that might mean that if that's unpredictable, how long people laugh over that, you might need to stick that information and repeat it again somewhere else in the story,
Right.
to reinforce that idea, and
Right.
make it
The next
clear.
line is like a throwaway.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're right. And then we get to that exposition. It's called, I think in stand up, it's called like stepping on the laugh, that you just keep going. You're not actually actively listening to the audience, which you don't have the ability to do in something that is finite, right? Something that is
yeah,
filmed and edited. That it's a real gift to be able to hear where those laughs are going to be and to give people time to breathe and enjoy and savor and come off that wave to then let the next one hit them in the face if it's a
yeah.
comedy.
And there are times when you can't control that next line. Let's say you have a long shot and you worked on, and it's like a oneer on your opening scene, and you have a really big joke, and then you have a plot point later. Well, if that's a problem, and these things happen all the time. So you have to find a different way to solve it. So
Mhm.
then in the next scene, do you need to say it? Or right before where you need to remember that, do you have to insert a voiceover that maybe you didn't work? And that's a lot of, this last one, you know, 1% that you put in is really clarifying those things that certain audiences might have missed when you show it in different situations. Um, Drunk or not drunk.
Absolutely. Well, so what we've covered is making sure you set yourself up for success in pre-production, having those pre-production conversations with your editor, involving them in the beginning to say, "Hey, this is what we're thinking. What are you going to need from us?" Making sure you ask the questions, let your editor ask the questions. How do you need things labeled? What kind of organization do you need? What's your timeline? And then hopefully you're working with an editor you've worked with before. You might have a shorthand about how those things need to go, but that you also know if you're hiring your team. You talked about making sure you're hiring an assistant editor if you can, if that's an option, because it should It should help you move that timeline along, even though it seems like it'd be additional cost. It actually saves you time, which
It's
is money in
almost always if
filmmaking.
the project's within a month, it saves time, yeah.
Absolutely.
Money, I mean.
Money is time. They're the same currency
Yeah.
in the
Sorry, I
same.
didn't
Yeah, absolutely. But also talking about knowing your audience, targeting your audience, um, and making sure that you involve them, ask them questions, let them be right, because their instinct is always going to be right. What makes them
Mhm,
laugh is what makes them laugh. That's who you're pitching it to, right? And
mhm.
speaking of pitching, you're talking about the power of your own storytelling as an artist, as a creator. Even if you don't have all those pieces you wanted to have, being able to lace them together with the storytelling in between to go, hey, we don't have color on this, but we know this footage is killer, or this is this moment of this star that we really want to show you because we're really excited about this moment. But you can weave that together with your own storytelling. And hey, that one went on to win an Emmy, right? And got picked up. So
Yep.
you know,
Yeah.
there's no one
So
way to do it.
yeah, and the thing is like, oh, I know just one last thing, a final thing I would say, you know, for narrative stuff, an easy rules to follow when you think, oh, is my thing too long? Um, Nonfiction is a little more complicated. It can depend on the kind of footage you have and whatever. Um, but never ever go longer than one page equals 1 minute. That is an
Right.
easy rule. If you think that you're being too excessive for an early in their career director, that's something you should follow.
Well, also, I think too, the key when we were talking about building your team, having those conversations in pre-production or even as you're fundraising, you need people to come to you beforehand and go, "Hey, we're gonna kind of do this. It's this many pages. It's this intricate. This is the kind of footage that we're using. This is the tone of or the genre, whatever we're talking about." To have that conversation with you beforehand so that they can budget for what you are likely to cost, and we don't go, "Oh, we have 20K for or 5K or whatever it is for post production," and we come to you at the end and we go, "Well, we need all these things for this." It's
Hmm.
never like a finite thing. It's a timeline. It's a sliding scale of if we need more notes, we can do that, but it's going to cost more money. But
Hmm.
also knowing that it's not, oh, we spent most of our 100K budget on this. Now instead of 20K, we have 7. So can you do it for that? It's not a bargain thing. It's an equal weight.
Yeah, and I would say, in like a verite documentary, your budget is going to equal your production budget pretty closely a lot of times. If you're
Close.
doing like a narrative thing, it's probably a quarter to a half, and that includes non-scripted or reality shows. It's about a quarter to half of your production budget. So that's just like an easy number to sort of keep in your head on what you can do.
Yep.
If you have VFX or animation, that adds a lot to post. So
Right.
that's another conversation.
And that's so key though, to just keep it in mind as you're going. If you're eating away at that budget, you're going to have to find it again so that you can make sure that post
Mhm.
is able to do for you all of the things in terms of polish that you want for it to do. As we said, we can hear and we can see and we can sense the level of post-production quality. And it's
Yep.
instinctual for our audience.
And if you don't have a huge budget or you did too much, whatever, show less at your pitch meeting and make sure it's the absolute best that you can do it. Um, you know, do something like you can talk, like we had talked before, talk between, if you can't figure a way to meld the two videos together, it's okay. Just have the conversation with who you're talking to. They're people, and they're going to understand how movies are made.
Of
So
course. Yeah, it's your job to help them see it, not to show them the whole thing finished. Because of course, in other countries where there is government funding, you might be able to go out and get $400,000 and go shoot a pilot exactly as it would transfer to Netflix, Australia or Netflix Brazil or something like that. We don't do that here. So you just need to give them enough to make them want more of that thing and to make them want to make that thing with you. Not to
mhm.
say, "We did all of it, you don't have to touch anything, just pay us and we can put it on right now." That's just not how it works in the US. But to make sure that it stands out. And, thank you for all of that. If anybody in the audience has any questions about what they would want to know regarding color, sound, music, graphics, VFX, Justin will be back with us teaching 3 more editions of this course, the 4 pillars of editing. We're so excited to have you here, and we thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Absolutely my pleasure.
So glad to have
Yeah.
you. And I know you're a very busy fella and you have a lot going on. So we always love checking in with you and benefiting from all of the work that you've been doing. And please know, for everybody that's watching, not only do we have more of Justin's course coming up in the coming months, but we also have submissions open for the festival, which is coming up October 4th through 7th of 2023 in Duluth. We'll have our 17th annual festival there, and submissions are open on Film Freeway. So make sure you submit. We want to see what you're doing with all this good gem stock that Justin is sharing with us. So thank you all so much, and we appreciate you being here.
For sure. And I should be at the festival this year again. So if you guys
I
submit,
love that.
I'll see you there.
Hope to see you in the fam.
Yeah.
Take care.